So let us look at what we term as biodiversity. So a forest reserve is home to hundreds of species. These include plants, animals, like the primates, birds, and insects. And then there is a private investor who is lobbying for part of the forest to be cleared for sugarcane farming. So a private investor is someone who has sufficient financial resources to either start a business, and in this case, this private investor, he wants the forest to be turned into a sugarcane plantation, part of it. And of course, people who are concerned with the environment, conservationists, are arguing that the forest supports biodiversity and contributes to climate regulation and is a source of traditional medicine for the nearby community. The district council that is supposed to make the decision, or basically to approve the decision, is seeking to get evidence-based recommendations on what needs to be done. So assuming you're one of the biologists who will have to do investigations and provide these recommendations, you definitely need to understand aspects to do with biodiversity, especially the levels of biodiversity and how each of these levels will actually be impacted by the conversion into a sugarcane plantation, by the conversion of the forest reserve into a sugarcane plantation. Of course, you also need to be able to understand why biodiversity is very important, and this forest is actually enabling biodiversity. Okay, so of what importance is this biodiversity in this reserve forest, and what will happen to this diversity when it is actually cleared for the farm, for the sugarcane plantation. Okay, and then lastly, what could you recommend the local government to do in order to balance conservation and economic development or economic needs? Because eventually, when you have these sugarcane farm, when it is established, the local government is going to get revenues. These revenues are going to come from this investor. Okay, they're going to get taxes, and that will help in developing the community. But also the community members are likely to get jobs in this farming estate. Okay, so let's look at the slides and see if we can be able to answer those questions. So when we talk about biodiversity, we are referring to diversity of life on Earth, or basically we are referring to variety of life on Earth. What does this mean? Now, for example, if you see a particular ecosystem, you will see that you will have a number of organisms in this ecosystem, whether plants, whether animals, whether microorganisms. The more you have variety of these species, the more you say basically this ecosystem is diverse. Okay, so you say there is biodiversity in this ecosystem. So when we, for example, look at the forest reserve that we have in this presentation, the forest reserve is having a number of species. We have plants, we have the primates, the chimpanzees are part of the primates, monkeys and things like that. And then you're also having birds there. You're having microorganisms that you actually also you cannot see with your eyes, but they are still there. So when we look at biodiversity, this is what we are talking about, the variety of life on Earth, basically, or in a given ecosystem. Now, we can look at biodiversity across three levels. Genetic diversity. Genetic diversity, here we're talking about the variation within genetic makeup of organisms within a species. So you can have, for example, birds. So the birds, for example, in the forest, they are going to be of different kinds, okay? Different types of birds, small, big, medium, whatever. These birds do not have the same kind of genetic makeup. But if some of the birds are killed or migrate, then the genetic makeup of the organisms or of the birds within that ecosystem is going to decrease. And then when we talk about species, the number and variety of the species within a given habitat or ecosystem. So in the forest, well, the examples I've given, plants, animals, and the microorganisms, they are very, very many, very many. They should be in 1,000, even above 1,000. There are very many organisms in a forest. What? In a forest reserve. Okay, from the microorganisms to those that you can see with your eyes. There are quite many. Okay, so that is species. So that is species diversity. And then ecosystem diversity, we're talking about the different kinds of ecosystems that are present. And again, in this forest, you will have different ecosystems. In the forest, you will find that you have, for example, in the soil, you have different organisms compared to those that are actually in the leaves. Okay, and then you have also the forest is not uniform. You can have some places where you have streams of water. You will have aquatic ecosystem. Okay, which is also different from other. And then you can have a forest reserve that is tending towards the let us say towards the mountainous areas. That is going to be different from the ecosystem in the middle of the forest reserve. So you have ecosystem biodiversity, meaning that if you are to study this forest quite closely, you will understand that the organisms that are staying in this forest are not the same throughout because of the different ecosystems that we have. We shall have aquatic ecosystem. You will have ecosystems that are to do with organisms living in the canopy and things like that. Okay, so that is ecosystem biodiversity. Within, for example, let us say forest reserve, or within a swamp, or let us say within a lake, you have a number of resources that humans can actually use. And these are the ones we are terming as natural resources. So, for example, in the forest reserve example, humans can get food, okay? They can get medicines, they can get firewood, and many other things, okay? These are natural resources from the environment, okay? Some of them are renewable, others are not renewable. Okay, renewable resources are those that replenish quickly. Okay, forests, wildlife, and water, these are renewable. The meaning of this is that yes, you can use these resources, but if you give them some time, these resources can be, you can get them back. Okay, you can get them back. If you cut some trees, you give them some few years, the trees will come back. So we term them as renewable. If you cut down the trees and then you plant others, you get the trees back. Those are renewable resources. So, and then we have those that take long to form. Okay, like for example, oil. Oil is from dead organisms that have undergone, that have become fossils. Okay, the process of forming these fossils from which you get this oil, it takes a number of years. So that's why we say they are non-renewable, because some of them, they cannot be replenished at all. When you're using once and for all. But others, they can slowly be replenished. Okay, that means that since there are a lot of things that we can get from the ecosystem, we need to protect the ecosystem. Okay, so in order to protect the ecosystem, we need to monitor the organisms that we have in the ecosystem. And of course, one of the first thing to do is to know which organisms do we have. And we are basically saying here that we have species, very many of them. Some of them we actually don't know. Okay, so we have about 1.5 species. Okay, but of course, studies are continuing to be done to identify more species, some that even scientists may not be knowing. So that's why it is very important to know the species that we have in an ecosystem, such that we can know species diversity in a particular ecosystem. And that is why we need to know these groups. Okay, specific groups. When we say specific taxa, we are basically referring to specific groups, because taxas are basically groups. Birds, insects, plants, whatever. We need to know them and where they are, such that we can be able to know that these organisms are declining in number, these ones are increasing, these ones are over time they are facing this threat and things like that. So comprehensive species count is very important in a particular area or a particular ecosystem. So if you have, for example, a water body, you should be able to know the type of fish that you have there, the kinds of fish that you have in that water body, such that over time you can continuously monitor and see, are you still having the same kinds of fish, or the species. We have some species that are actually getting extinct. Okay, but generally, around the whole world, you have a variation in the species that you have. You have some areas that have more biodiversity compared to others. Because, for example, if you go to a desert, you can't expect to get a variety of species there. You find a few species occupying such an area. But if you go to a tropical rainforest, then you should expect a number of organisms. Okay, so biodiversity is not the same. You have areas where you have many variety of you have a variety of organisms, and in others you have fewer. So we are saying that in the tropical regions, you're having more compared to the polar regions. Those the Arctic areas, like very cold areas, you can't find there a lot of biodiversity. And then usually we can look at biodiversity depending on whether you're talking about land ecosystems or aquatic ecosystems. So aquatic ecosystems, we're talking about um, um, organisms in water bodies. Okay, so we can talk about a freshwater ecosystem. We can talk about marine water ecosystem. These two aquatic ecosystems are not the same. So that's what we are basically saying, that okay, we need to understand which ecosystem are we talking about. Land ecosystems usually have greater biodiversity compared to marine ecosystems or marine environments. Okay, again, on land, there is also variation. What you find on a flat terrain or topography is not what you can find in mountainous areas. So usually you'll have areas that have more species compared to others. Okay, so areas that have a lot of biodiversity, we can term them as biodiversity hotspots. These ones are characterized by what are the things that you look at for you to say this is an area which has a lot of what? Biodiversity. We look at species richness. Usually this should be high. The point here is that the species that we have should be very, very, very many. That is species richness. The second thing is what we call high levels of endemism. This is about finding species that you cannot find anywhere else. And then the other thing that you look at is the degree of threat from human or environmental pressures. And then the unique ecological or evolutionary traits that you look at. Okay, so for you to be able to study biodiversity of different ecosystems, these are areas that you really need to think about. The kinds of species that you're finding there, are the species that you're finding there found somewhere else also, and are there activities that are threatening these species and things like that. And then do we have evolutionary changes within the species? Because the species will not be the same throughout. So you can have varieties, and those varieties because of evolution. Okay, so what are the evolutionary forces that are making some of these species to acquire certain characteristics or traits?